Welcome to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps, a bi-weekly podcast with me, Dr. Kish Cumi Price. Hello and welcome back to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps. I am Dr. Kish Cumi Price, and I hope that you have joined me on this journey. Of course, I've shared before that the content builds upon each other, so hopefully you can check out previous episodes. However, if you're just now tuning in, I think we can catch you up to speed as to where we are today in our conversation. So, we've talked a bit about bullies and how bullies show up in our workplace, in our lives, but we're also talking about poverty pimps, and we're going to end the series talking about wimps. And so I want to make sure that you all get the big picture of why this is important. And a lot of this has to do with just my personal experience and wanting to share so that others do not feel isolated in their own journeys that they may be experiencing in their lives in the workplace. So for today, we talked last episode about the different types of poverty pimps, and we talked about one of the first types being the deceptive or deceiving poverty pimp. And of course, we framed this up quite a bit so you understand when we're talking about poverty pimps, we are talking about people who are taking advantage of and not using the term in a derogatory sense for those who are actually doing good work in the community with good intentions and high moral character. So, to get into today's discussion, I think it makes sense to go back to the incident that I was sharing with you all before around how this could potentially show up in the world, right? Or in the workplace. So for me, it happened to be an experience with a client that I was contracting with. And in so doing, understanding that the banner that he was operating under and everything that he had said actually about why he did what he did and the mission and vision of his organization seemed to be solid, seemed to add up, seemed to align with the attitude and philosophy that I have. And so I was excited, to engage in the work. It wasn't until we started having more, I'll say, water cooler discussions that I realized that his philosophy was not at all in alignment with mine, that there were a lot of justifications as to why he believed what he believed, but operated under this banner that was completely in contradiction to everything that he had shared with me personally. It wasn't until some time had passed that I began to see even more occurrences in which this disparate display of words versus actions continuing to manifest itself in our work together. And it got to a point where I basically could not continue on in the relationship as you know and when I say this, you should understand that when you're contracting with someone, and many of you do understand this, when you're contracting with someone, you're contracting based on an agreement that both of you have come to terms with in order to carry out the scope of work. What is not underlined or even attended to in most of those agreements is the basic understanding that there should be respect and integrity and all the other highly moral values that you would assume should be present in a professional setting. So in this particular instance, it got to a point where I felt that his professionalism did not exist um, at all in the way that I felt like it should if he was engaging in a relationship with me as a contractor. And in that moment, I think there were some things I had justified as, his character. And when I say character, more so personality, right? Like he was a character. He had a lot of, um, I guess you could call it charisma, but it was one of those things where it's like, oh, that's just him. That's how he operates, and making jokes that were inappropriate at times and things of that nature. So in my interactions, which were fairly limited to the scope of work that I signed up for, I didn't have as many occurrences that became red flags. It wasn't until we started having more, as I said, water cooler conversations. And there's something to be said about people who enter into the work of advocating for a community or a group of people, population, as if they understand or as if they are true advocates or champions for that particular cause or for those particular, that body of people. What I have grown to understand better is that at the same time that you can assume that people have the best interests in mind of the folks that they're saying that they're advocating for, you have to always be cautious about really trying to understand if that's true or not. Are they showing themselves to be worthy of advocating in this space? And if they're not, then it's a problem. Whose problem is it? Well, for me, in this particular situation, in my situation, it became my problem because I could no longer be associated with someone who did not agree, did not align with the community's best interests, even if it was cloaked in, well, sure, I do. I knew at the heart of the matter that was not the case. He was in it to get the money that he could get, the grants that he could secure in order to say that he was doing the work, but he wasn't about the work. And so that is something to really dissect. I think for many people, is sometimes people are okay with saying, well, as long as you're saying that the right thing, then it's fine. Or even if it looks like you're doing the right thing, it's fine. But it's about motive. It's about character. It's about trust. Like, can I trust you to advocate on behalf of these vulnerable youth who are depending on you to stand in the gap for them? No, I can't. And if I can't, then I need to not be a part of this. And so I'm sharing that because, and I don't know. I really don't know who's listening to this. So I don't know if this is something you've experienced or something you may experience in the future. But in case that happens to be something that you experience in the future, or you have experienced, or you're currently experiencing it, I don't want you to feel like you're alone or not empowered to make decisions for you, for your own peace, right? For your own name. Like, what we are, what we stand for. And if you believe that you should be prioritizing money over cause, and let me just say this, okay? I'm just going to be completely transparent so that you understand what I mean by this, because you may be thinking at the time, oh, it's not a big deal to end a contract with somebody because you probably had others on the table and it wasn't going to be a direct hit to your finances, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people are not bold enough or courageous enough to step away from something when it's not right or call something out when it's not right. It's because you're trying to protect your own peace or prosperity or, professionalism, right? Your career. And so at the time, I was in a very vulnerable state because I was really trying to figure out what was next for me. And in this time in my life, I was divorced at the time, so single mom with my three sons, trying to figure things out and financially for sure. And at the time, I really couldn't afford not to have that contract. I felt like I needed that contract to the point where when I walked away from it, I really questioned God. I went in the car, so let me explain how, because you're probably like, what? Wait, like what happened here? So the, how did I walk away? Why did I walk away? What was the last straw, right? Well, I was on a fast, a community fast with my church at the time. And if you know about fasting and how it provides just more clarity, right? More spiritual clarity. You're more in tune with things that you probably wouldn't have been before, things that would have been distracting before that you wouldn't have registered on a spiritual level. Suddenly they do, right? And so after coming off of this 21-day fast, I was very sensitive to um, understanding not what was being said, but also the tone, tenor, and implications of what was being said. And so we were having a team lunch slash meeting, if you will. And this individual that I'm talking about that I was under contract with began on his, one of his rants about who knows what at the time. It was just, jokes and rants, right? And then his focus just kind of shifted to me, where he started questioning something that I had done, but it was because I was asked to do it. He just wasn't aware because he wasn't around. And he began to like go back and forth with me about this particular thing. And then proceeded to use cursing, and not in a calling me out of my name necessarily, but it was enough for me to to say, we're done. Like I cannot, there's no level of respect here for you that on my part. And obviously you have no respect for me to speak to me that way. And I left. Now, should I have left probably a month before that time? Probably so. But I was not in a place where I was willing to push that button at the time because of what I just shared with you, because I felt like I needed the contract. I needed the fund. I needed, I have lives depending on me to get the job done. Right. And so in that moment, it was no question. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I had every ounce of courage and patience and peace that I needed to deal with the situation, because I could have gone flip mode, right? Like I could have gone to a space that is not reflective of the journey that I've had with God and where He has me today, but I didn't. And thank God that like I said, I was fasted up in that place and had the boldness to do what needed to be done and the fortitude and wisdom to operate in a professional way, gather my things, say goodbye, get into my car, and say goodbye to, a colleague that I worked with closely, actually the one that I referenced, that said, hey, we need to get this done. And I did it. And that's what he was confronting me about. But anyway, I go out to my car and I start driving. And as I'm driving, I start crying. And it was weird because I was just like, it was so like a rush of emotions. It was this rush of, I can't believe that I just had that experience, that, that somebody would think that you could talk, for one, that you could talk to me the way that you talk to me. Two, that you thought I would stand there and take it. Three, that you felt like this was, for me anyway, I felt like, now what am I supposed to do now? Right? Because I did stand up, I did say what needed to be said, and I left, which is what needed to be done in the moment. And I don't have any remorse about that even today. But I poured just tears because then I started thinking about the impact. So I'm thinking, what about the kids, the youth that I was working with, that are now going to have to be told that I'm no longer around, right? And I had developed relationships with these kids and rapport, and I no longer have access to them now because that was the connection, right? There was no way for us to have personal connections with the students because they were justice involved. So, I thought about all of that, and, thought about, like I said, personal impact on me and my family. But I knew I did the right thing. And I was just like, God, I need you to give me direction. I need you to show me what's next. I need you to show me how to handle this. Do I need to do anything else? Right? Like, I stepped away from that. However, this individual is still operating in this space. He's still, and in my estimation, a poverty pimp, right? He still has these bullying tendencies. And is there anything else, that I need to do? Because what happens here, right? And let me pause here for a minute and address this, what I'm saying, for a little longer, which is, what else can be done? What else should be done? In that particular situation, to be honest, I really didn't have capacity to do anything other than what I did at the time, because, as I said, I was emotionally drained from the situation and trying to figure out what was next in the midst of all these other things that were happening in my life personally. However, there's a certain level of impact that can be made to address these poverty pimps, especially those that are operating in deceit, right? There's this cloak of deception over what they're doing. One way is to expose them in whatever way that looks like, right? I mean, there's exposure through, editorial exposure. So you can write about it, you can talk about it, you can reach out to partners that were involved with this person, so they know your experience and your take on them and their philosophy and what they're actually doing versus what they're saying, and how they're, not in alignment with the work of the community. All of those things could be done. If you're a person of prayer, of faith, right, as I am, you pray. You absolutely pray. Pray through the whole thing, right? You should be praying through these interactions and any agreements and partnerships. And I believe, to be honest, that I was there for a purpose, right? I was there for the kids, the youth that I was connected to and with for the time that I was. So I absolutely believe that sometimes there may be bad experiences and you're dealing with these poverty pimps, but don't short circuit your assignment. So sometimes they need to see someone of integrity and high character in order to be convicted about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And a lot of times it won't even happen with the person who actually needs it, but the people who've been supporting them and enabling them will begin to see it, which is something I know happened. I don't even have to hear from my colleagues, but I know, and I'm calling them colleagues, but people that I was working with during the the time period of this contract, I know that they were able to see the error of his ways and were not bold enough or courageous enough to stand up against him and say, you're wrong and you need to stop and this isn't right and you don't treat people this way. But they didn't. And so to actually see someone do it and to see it executed in a way that I think they needed to see it, where it wasn't, as I said, I wasn't belligerent, I wasn't unprofessional, I was very professional, and I stood up for me and the people I represent. And so I just encourage you to understand the importance of that and the importance simultaneously, the importance of exposing what needs to be exposed. Because for every poverty pimp that is getting money, okay, getting money under the guise of supporting a community, a population that they're not actually down for, is a problem, because that space could be occupied by someone who actually is an advocate and supporter of, right? So that needs to be called out, regardless of how powerful this poverty pimp thinks that they are, right? And I know I'm using singular terms here, and sometimes it's a collective, right? It's a mafia, right? But it is to be noted that the deception that is tied to and attached to the poverty pimping needs to be explored more. People need to ask more questions, right? Don't assume that just because an abstract look good or a soundbite or their body of work where they've worked with these different organizations puts them in a place of worthiness to have these huge contracts where they're working on behalf of the city or the school district, or because they're working with our kids, they're working with, that. Just keep that in mind, is at what expense, at what cost, right? Just because they look good on paper doesn't mean they're good for the people. And so I want to make sure that we understand that, like, and when I'm talking to you as an audience, I don't know who's listening. Like I said, it could be youth listening, it could be adults listening, it could be very empowered folks listening, it could be people who feel like I don't even have a voice, right? But you do. And I really want to encourage you to think about what we talk about on this podcast, and think about it from the lens of, can I even recognize it, right? A lot of what I'm sharing is examples so that you can see what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it may feel like something's off here. Explore that. Everybody may not sense it, but if you do, it may be for a reason, a purpose, an assignment for you personally. And, I just want, like I said, I do not want you to feel alone in the journey if you have had a similar path as I have in this space. And if you haven't, I just want you to be aware that this happens a lot. And it's why our cities, our states, our countries are in the state that they're in which the, I guess I'll say, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because it's at the expense of ignorance, right? Like, we are in a place of being powerful when we have the knowledge of what's occurring and the knowledge of how to stop it from happening. But if you don't have the knowledge, then you assume things are happening just as they're supposed to happen, right? We gave out this money. We are expecting these things to get done. This company said that they're well suited to do it. They have great outcomes and they're going to get it done. Half the time, think about it. If you're deceiving the people that are funding you because you want them to think you're a certain way and that you're about the work, and you're also deceiving the community that you're supposed to be serving, would you not also be deceptive when it comes to reporting what you're actually doing and what those outcomes look like? Probably so, right? Deception has no limits, right? The lying has no limits. So just keep that in mind, and I will close out because I'm trying to keep these episodes at around 30 minutes or less, just to give you bite sized pieces of this information. And I wanted to read a segment that I thought was helpful in kind of breaking down why this is important. And I know sometimes I share this from, spiritual perspective. And today, that's what I'd like to do, just sharing with you an excerpt from Proverbs again. And typically it is from Proverbs, right? Or Psalm, but Proverbs 6. And this is addressing the things that the Lord hates. So it's Proverbs 6, starting with verse 16. It says, "These 6 things the Lord hates. Indeed, 7 are repulsive to him: a proud look, the attitude that makes one overestimate oneself and discount others, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood." This is Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 17. Why do I read that in closing? Because it's not only that we should detest and hate this kind of behavior, but it's an understanding that God hates it, right? He hates the proud, right? He hates the lying tongue. Hates the deceiver, right? And I kind of just misspoke there. I was trying to say hate and I said help, but it's the same, right? God hates that, but he wants to help these people. Like he wants to help them get better, but you can't get better if you're not willing to address it, right? Like you have to be willing to say, this is what it is, and address it. And I am in a place where I believe that another characteristic of poverty pimps is overestimation of oneself and one's knowledge and one's ability and one's expertise. And typically, these poverty pimps are deceptive because they assume they know everything, but they are discounting the very real element of expertise of the community that they're serving. So that's another element, just to keep that in mind. And we're going to go into that a little bit in our next episode about who is at the center of the work, who's the the most valued entity in the work. And that is a way to help you evaluate, is this a poverty pimp? And if so, we need to call this out, right? So I hope this helps somebody. I know it helps me every time just to share this information and get it out because I know that people need to know they're not alone, and people need to know how to address the shenanigans. And that's what this is, right? Poverty pimping is designed to get over, to get over on people, to get over on the people who need the most support, right? So I'll close us out with that and just with our encouragement that I give every time, which is be bold, be courageous, be un-pimped. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us.